Welcome to Mavericks. I'm Joey Garcia, and in this episode, we'll be speaking to a blockchain trailblazer. He's one of the founders of IOV Labs, the RSK smart contract platform, better known as Rootstock.
At the end of 2013, I decided I wanted to devote myself to see how we could put Bitcoin to the service of society and create this inclusive financial system.
He's a great friend and a true maverick. It's Diego Zaldivar. This is Mavericks, brought to you by Xapo Bank. So Diego, awesome to have you here, first of our Mavericks series. And I know enough about you, like super interesting, a long history. But for me, one of the super interesting things is where it all started. So back in the day, I've heard you talk before about your mom. You were 9 years old, slums of Buenos Aires. You know, what did you see? What did you think? How did she sort of influence what was happening? How did the whole journey start?
Yeah, it started when I was very young. My mother was a social activist. She was working in the slums of Buenos Aires, doing many things. Indeed, also she helped found a political party, the first Green Party in Argentina. So I was like, of course, I was a child, and then she was taking me with her. So I was exposed, if you want, to the inequalities of society very young. So that was, if you want, that is embedded in me. It's like it's one of my major drivers in life is to think how we can sort out the inequalities. No? And
she, I mean, during that period, she will have had that influence. I mean, take that through to today. I read your Twitter name and I see Equalitatem Honoris.
Yes.
So how did you
honor
get that?
to equality, it would be.
What sort of influence did she have on that?
Well, I think it's interesting because she was not like feeding me with ideological concepts. She was just taking me with her to do the work she was doing. And by that exposure is that I build up my own thinking around that. No, it's like, and one of the things I saw that, was the biggest unfairness or injustice I saw was seeing people, very talented people, extremely hardworking people, kind people with big hearts, not being able to get out of poverty and not being able to get out of like a pretty difficult, tough life just because they were born in the wrong setting. No, it's like not because of their. And that is kind of, for me, the worst injustice, you can face in society. It's like somebody that, puts everything of themselves and cannot thrive just because. Yeah.
So, and you see that, you experience your mother's showing you things. You're really sort of taking your role in. What do you do? How do you react to that? How did you react to that? What was the next step?
Well, that in a way that shaped my purpose in life. Everybody says, you have to look for your purpose in life, but it's not that easy. It's like usually, the way to find your purpose in life is by discarding things. It's like you do trial and error of a lot of things. And through life, if you're lucky enough, you will find it. In my case, I was so lucky because I found my purpose in life as young as I would say, as 12. It was like I knew I wanted to reshape society in a better way since I was very, very young. And then I did a lot of experiments. Of course, my first steps were actually doing the same that my mother was doing social activism. I was part of the creation of the Green Party in 1989. So it was like before green was cool. And also with a very humanistic approach is for me, like ecology was to the service of society, not like an end in itself, or a goal in itself. And I did a lot of experiments, and indeed that also gave me a lot of learnings about how power structure works and how power, which many, many years later, maybe I would say, 30 years later, were the reason why I understood the deeper consequences of Bitcoin when I got in touch with it. It's like because I was looking for something different, to a new way of structure societies that was more fair, and I was living the problems of power concentration since I was very young. No, because one thing that happened to me is that in the social movement I was part of, people was like very, very kind, very well intended with great values, but I saw corruption in a different form. It was not corruption in the form of like people willing to get more money, but it was more in the form of people willing to have more prestige. And as they were gathering, like we were structured in a hierarchical structure. So as people was like coordinating bigger and bigger human groups, I saw how power was eating up in them. Like then they were losing themselves into the power struggle, and that was the reason why at my early 20s I decided to stop doing social activism within those structures and started chasing technology as a way of transforming society.
And that's what I was going to take you back to, because you said that you decided on what that was at the age of 12, and that's a young age to define and discover a purpose of life. And then you mentioned the Bitcoin protocol, so somewhere down the line. In between, the tech sort of change. How did you get from the age of 12, thinking and defining a purpose of life, to something way down the line from a tech perspective? What was your sort of first step in the world?
It's fun because my father's wife, she was a doctor, but she lived in Houston for a while. Houston was like in the 70s, was a highly technological city. It was thought as the city of the future. And she got in touch with computing back in the day. So she told me, I think this is the future. You need to learn. I was 11. You need to learn programming. Why don't we take a programming class or course? And we did it. And of course, in the first semester, she was she had nothing to do with that. So she dropped, and I finished. And I remember because my final exam was doing an accounting program. But at 11, I didn't understand accounting. So for me, I was following rules, and then, of course, I did the program. I finished the exam, and that was my first connection with technology. That programming class or course.
And you were already thinking about technology and transforming society when you were younger, or you were learning and discovering along the way?
When I started back at 11, I didn't have this concept. I was helping my friends from primary school in other ways, like with their problems. It was like a closer environment. That thinking on the social transformation developed later. I was doing my interactions with the first BBS, my first connections with people around the globe. There was a BBS in France called Giga that had 6 modems, so you can talk to 6 people at the same time. And we were connecting with people from Israel, Australia, and that was like the first like globally connected experience I had. And at the same time, the people from that was doing the CD of the 50th anniversary for Clarín was introduced to me through a very good friend, a photographer, because I was doing digital photography. And they shared with me a lot of the things that trigger my imagination about how technology could impact the world. No, because they shared me the Wire magazine, that was 1994. They shared me the Digital Divide from Negroponte, from the Media Lab. So it was connecting I would say my main drivers in life. No, it was connecting the social elements. The Digital Divide is about that. No, it's about how society will be shaped if half of the population, or more than half of the population, doesn't have access directly to digital tools. No, so now it's interesting because in 2020, more or less, we reached the mark where half of the unbanked, for example, or the excluded in our society had digital access. So in a way, we are finding our way into create this inclusiveness, or this way of bringing these tools and integrating into society everybody.
But is that what you were thinking of at the time, or when you got it? I mean, was the internet then, or as it was developing, all these systems, was it about having fun, or were you thinking about specific sort of social good?
Well, for me, it was a process of discovery. It's like, well, they told me in 1994, if Clarín create the media lab into the newspaper. We want you to be part. And I did. In 1995, I joined. I was the third member of the media lab. And indeed, I was the first webmaster. We launched the website of Clarín in 1996. So I was like doing things and trying, but that feeling that this tool could be potentially a driver for positive social transformation was in the back of my head. There were fun things like Wire Magazine in 1994, the special edition on the Burning Man. So since ever I was thinking on that crazy party that happens on the. So there was a mixture of like excitement about this new culture, like. But
and then Clarín specifically. I mean, if you talk about a website or an Argentinian newspaper online, I suppose suddenly you have this concept of access to data, right? Access to information from Argentinians that were
absolutely
all over the place.
Because Clarín also was a sponsor of Media Lab from the MIT. So we were having people from the Media Lab come to Buenos Aires and share with us their vision. So we were discussing the man-machine interactions, which is the core focus of the Media Lab. So we were discussing how, information was going to be absorbed by humans in this new context. So a lot of our work in the newspaper was not only translating the physical newspaper into a new medium, but was a lot about experimenting with new ways of structuring information. So we were working a lot about contextual information, hypertext, and I did some very pretty experiments. I created a remote control, for example, where you could have an experience like a journey through multiple websites with a contextual remote control on top of it. So many things that today are easy technically to do, but conceptually we were experimenting. And that's why when Clarín came out was in the leading edge of websites back then. It's like I created an interface so people could chat from the web because back then you needed a special software called an IRC client called Mirk. So it was not easy for people. So we created an interface on the web so people could chat and created the first communities. And there were two realizations there. No, it's like the day we released the website, on the following day, we were getting emails from Argentinians all over the world thanking us for having the opportunity to know what was going on in their motherland, like in real time. Because at that time, getting to know what was happening in Argentina took like 24 to 48 hours.
And that sorry, Diego, but that was also part of an evolution, right? So when the internet came around or whatever it was, PCs, etc., and everyone was thinking about, potentially sending an email. Actually, it was initially used only by certain sort of professors.
In the academia,
Exactly.
And until then, it was only restricted to academia.
Exactly.
And that was it.
So then it gets to the stage of Clarín and it's online and you have guys from Argentina, different parts of the world writing in. I mean, amazing. And then how the big step. So from an internet of data and the sharing of information, you probably weren't thinking about access to financial services around the world or anything like that. But how do you get to the concept of an internet of value? How do you take the next step? What triggered that?
Well, yeah, I think it's like because I saw the innovation cycle of the digital world from the beginning, I would say till now, almost to the beginning, from the home computer till now. And I have lived through the innovation cycle of the Internet of Information, what I call the Internet of Information, which is the .com era. And when I got in touch with Bitcoin, to be honest, at the beginning I didn't get it. It's like for me it was a fun experiment in 2011 when I got in touch.
How did you get into it?
It was a friend of mine. He's a hacker. I used to hire to do some Linux projects back in the day, in the late 90s, early 2000s. He was programming protocols for voice over IP, and he told me, Eito, you need to check this. This is very interesting. I saw it, but there were no much use. It was like very fringe use cases for Bitcoin, like totalitarian countries where people were using that to get, to offer their services, but very limited. And also, I was kind of at odds with money back in the day. Not at odds, but I didn't find the connection, the true connection between money and the human dimension. No, which that changed in the same year. In 2011, I got in touch with a ethical banker, Joan Melé from Triodos Bank, and he has a talk called "Conscious and Money," where he connected the human factor to money. So he made me understand that money was a tool, a very powerful tool, in a way to accumulate and handle human energy. It's like, that's how we manage. It's like, now I have other thinking, like more evolved thinking, but money is a more objective way of storing human energy and effort. No, whether that effort comes from physical work, mental work, creativity, but it's a way to accumulate and manage human. And when I did that connection. And in 2012, a very good friend of mine, Wences Casares, in the early 2012, he told me, "Oh, Dieguito, you have to check this." And I said, "Yeah, Wences, I already saw that." It's like, I mean, it's great, but I don't think, no, Dieguito, Wences doesn't take no for an answer, no? So he came to like, okay, I say, okay, let's do this, because it's the only way I will get rid of you by doing what you want me to do. So I opened an account at blockchain.info, and then, he sent me, he was in the Silicon Valley, he sent to Buenos Aires, where I was, 5,000 Bitcoins, that was like 50K USD back in the day, and I sent that money back to him, and the whole process took an hour. So when I saw that, I said, that's when I came to a second realization. I said, okay, this is how a truly open and neutral financial system should work, because this was a purely peer-to-peer interaction. It's like we didn't have to ask permission to anybody. There were facilitators, like the website, but basically it was him sending me money. I was sending that money back, almost all of it. That was another aha moment. It's like, he told me keep 1 Bitcoin, but at the end I had 0.9995. So then I realized I was paying for the fees of the transaction, which is another interesting concept in Bitcoin. It's like the cost of the transaction is always there, but it's obfuscated in the traditional financial system, and in this system it was completely transparent.
So firstly, can you send me 5,000 Bitcoin?
Yeah.
Let's just do a test and stuff.
But you will give them back?
Oh, well, yeah.
Of course.
Secondly, you talk about, it's super interesting. You've been through, say, an internet journey. You get to this sort of concept. You're talking about things. You're seeing a blockchain-based transaction. But what's the trigger to say, oh my goodness, I want to devote my life to this? What's that moment?
The thing is, after that talk, that experience with Wences, I was almost 15 days non-sleeping, really or barely sleeping, reading about Bitcoin, mostly on the monetary aspects of it, because I come from a technical and social background, so the financial elements were the more foreign to me. So I started reading about the history of money, of course, shelling out the article from Xapo, how Bretton Woods, how the financial structure of the world was working. And at the end, I find an article from Eric Borges that is called something like A Libertarian View on Bitcoin or something like that. And I don't know why, because I reread the article recently and it's not exactly there, but that was the moment I find out that Bitcoin was a tool for more than the financial elements. For me, it was the realization that Bitcoin was the beginning of a new innovation or disruption that could change how we manage trust between people. And that was the answer I was looking for since the late 90s, when I stopped doing social activism within an organization. So that was the moment.
Let me interrupt. Let me ask you one question. You use the word trust. Mm-hmm. So your trust is sort of moving from, whatever, a defined intermediary or whoever that might be, to effectively a system or a software. So it's a middleman to middleware. That's the journey that most people go on. How do you build trust, or how do you expect people to build trust in, software?
That's a great point, because I think it's actually, you're completely right. I think the main value of Bitcoin, or the main disruption of Bitcoin, is like two things. Is one, creating a means for digital scarcity. Before Bitcoin, there were no way to have digital scarcity. And when you are managing value in all of its forms, the scarcity is a must. It's like you cannot have scarcity without, you cannot have value without scarcity. It's like, so that's the big change that Bitcoin brought to the table. No, it's like the big innovation that was not possible the Internet of Information changed a lot of dimensions of society, but the one thing that could not change is how we manage value, or how we exchange it, how we store it. And the other thing is what you're mentioning is trust creation. And I don't think it's like this is replacing intermediaries, because trust on a human level is a social construct. No, it's like in the village, it was very clear. You had your reputation. You were living on the village. It's like, once you kill your reputation, that's it. It's like you are. That's why people was vanquished from the cities. I mean, like losing your belonging to a community was a sentence to death. No? That's in the Greek times, for example. So, but the thing is, what we are doing is making trust creation more efficient. No, it's like what we are doing. So that delegation or transfer of trust still will happen. It's like you will have institutions which are ways of accumulating trust, if you want, over time, and you will have institutions still transferring trust into individuals. You will have trust from individuals to individuals, but what you have is a medium where that trust can be recorded in a reliable way. So we can do new things. So now what we are creating is a new way of managing trust in a more efficient, more decentralized way that has all the benefits of the past model and will incorporate the past model. It's not removing it, just incorporating that and removing the problems of concentration of power.
There are groups. I mean, obviously Xapo would be one of them, an access point to a certain network in the most secure possible way. And that's really what a regulated sort of bank and the infrastructure on that can give people. But then, there's a lack of trust in the world. There's a lack of trust. Why do you think that all banks aren't moving in that direction, or larger parts of society are moving in that direction? Where's the lack of trust today? It's a difficult one.
It's a good question. I think it's like, how you build trust. I think one key element, and it's an element that was present in the Internet of Information, is neutrality. It's like that the platform you use to interact with others is neutral, and that's what blockchains and the Internet of Value, as I call it, that is this network of networks for the management of value, brings. Because once you have an open network with certain rules, and it's it has game theory that enforces agreements, not like a third party that enforces agreements, you are removing a lot of the subjectivity in those interactions. So what you have is a neutral environment to engage with others, and that is what we are doing. People say, okay, blockchains are about transparency. Not necessarily. It's like, of course, you can have a neutral, transparent, and secure blockchain. That would be an ideal scenario, but not necessarily ideal for all the use cases. Maybe you can have the equivalent of an intranet of value, where you want like transparency and reliability, but within the limits of an organization. Or you can have an extranet where basically of value, where you are creating the same level of transparency among many organizations, but you want to be opaque to the world. You only want to be transparent within the walls of trust. So I think what we will see is like different applications of this technology in different contexts. But I think the main element is neutrality. Much like the Internet of Information brought neutrality in terms of access to knowledge, in terms of access to opinion. No, it gave a voice to societies. And the same will happen with the financial system. It's like it's not that we are removing all the intermediaries or all the organizations that are accumulating trust and value, but they will need to serve a purpose.
What's the biggest fundamental difference for you between institution X that itself creates its own network and the Bitcoin protocol, which isn't subject to control by anyone?
Well, openness and neutrality would be
and that's fundamental, right?
That's the fundamental change. It's like you are not relying. This is an important concept. It's like I realized back in the late 90s, my problem with power accumulation is not. It's like it's when you have power, even if you are a good person, even if you have amazing values, you are still exposed to the extortion of other powers that will want to force you to use that power in certain way. So it's like it's not even like an ethical dilemma for the individual. It's a problem of how it's structured. It's like when you accumulate enough power, even if you are a very ethical person, you will be exposed to certain. And maybe you can say, okay, no, because I'm a person of value, so I'm not going to give in, even if my personal security is at stake. But then what happens if your family physical security is at stake? So eventually, the only solution is, like I always say, the best way, not to be extorted is not to have the power in the first place. So the only way we can really sort these problems we have is like by fragmenting power and making power concentration liquid. So it's like, in the political realm, we all delegate our political power to individuals to the government that then administers that power from us. It's not about not doing that, because we need that delegation of power, those proxies to manage power. But the thing is, like, if they don't fulfill their duties, we need to have a way to easily redistribute that power into something else.
It's trust, right?
It's trust.
It's trust from that institution X to
moving it to another institution that will really fulfill their duty. So
what are the next steps? What are the other things? Why did the RSK? Where did that come from? That's a whole other conversation.
Well, as I told you, when I started with Bitcoin, I had the intuition it could become like this open financial system for humanity. As I started understanding Bitcoin deeper, I realized that it was going to be always volatile, or for many, many decades, pretty volatile. Therefore, it was not an option as an asset for people who lives day by day, week by week, month by month. Also, I realized Bitcoin, there's a trilemma in blockchains. No, it's like people who wants to scale blockchains, they need to sacrifice security and functionality. Or if you want to have more functionality, you have to sacrifice security and very likely scalability. So you always have this tension between security, scalability, and functionality. And Bitcoin was designed to maximize security over the other two. So also Bitcoin alone was not enough to create a financial system that could serve billions of users. So with those two concepts is that, well, and this connected to my personal purpose. At the end of 2013, I decided I wanted to devote myself to see how we could put Bitcoin to the service of society and create this inclusive financial system. I say it's not a system for the unbanked. It's a system that is inclusive by design, that will serve any human being, regardless of their economic condition. No, it's like it's not designing a system only for those excluded. But then I started this search. I had these realizations about Bitcoin as an asset, Bitcoin as a platform. We started doing some experiments in the slums of Buenos Aires, some experiences, like inviting them to the Bitcoin meetups in 2014 and seeing how they were interacting with Bitcoin. And honestly, we were learning from them and they were learning from us. So it was an amazing experience. And from that, I came with the idea that we needed to extend Bitcoin to become, to really extend Bitcoin. Conceptually, we needed what now has the name of stable assets. But I didn't want to do that in a way that also was relying on third parties, because then we were in the same problem. So I wanted a truly decentralized monetary system, like a peer-to-peer monetary system. On top of that peer-to-peer monetary system, to build a decentralized financial system. And then, of course, the final thing, to have also a decentralized internet, because the internet became very centralized lately. So in order to do that, I started talking. When I had a conversation with Nick Xapo at the end of 2014 in October in Palo Alto, and we were discussing Ethereum because the idea of Ethereum was there, not the implementation, but the idea was there. And for us, in a way, in that discussion arose the thing that bootstrapping a new network, decentralized network, and giving liquidity and acceptance to a new asset was going to take too long. So from that discussion, the idea that actually the ideal model would be to scale, to extend Bitcoin. And then that's when we reached out to Sergio Lerner. Sergio was the first to create a Turing complete or general purpose a cryptocurrency in May 2013 called Quickscoin. And that's when the idea of extending Bitcoin of Rootstock, that was the second layer sidechain to Bitcoin with smart contract capabilities, started. No, indeed, we were so focused on only those challenges because the challenges of Rootstock themselves were huge. It's like, because we decided to go after the model proposed by Blockstream of implementing a sidechain. So nobody had achieved that before. So we had, but on top of that,
just explain super basically what a sidechain is.
So a sidechain is a second layer to Bitcoin, or is a separate network, blockchain network ideally, but it can be something else. But it's a second that shares the same native asset. So a sidechain has Bitcoin as the native asset. So the fees of the network are paid in Bitcoin. And why that's important is because everything in decentralized blockchains and networks, is specifically in blockchains, is based on game theory. So all the systems are by definition adversarial. So if you have a secondary network that it's like sharing resources with Bitcoin but has a different currency, and that secondary network becomes very successful, that secondary network can become a threat for Bitcoin, no? Unless the native asset is the same. As Rootstock grows, it makes Bitcoin stronger. That was part of the early design decisions we made. No?
Lots of people have talk all the time about the internet being sort of the language of the internet, TCP/IP or whatever it is, being the core sort of language of that technology. The blockchain you're talking about, you've mentioned Blockstream, obviously RSK. There are lots of other protocols doing all sorts of things with different forms of functionality. Where do you see all that going? Will there be one to rule them all? Is it going to be the language of the blockchain in 2050? Or where do you see all of that going?
Difficult to tell because it's like, but what I do know is that usually these innovation cycles have the round cycles of expansion and synthesis. That's how it works. So I think we are at the end of expansion cycles. Like, and in that sense, like Ethereum brought a lot of diversity to the ecosystem because suddenly you had a Turing complete or a general purpose programming language, which I said also had the trade-off of having less security, So it was. But it enabled an environment, Turing completeness, that is like that you can program anything you want. That's basically a very simple way of explaining it. Enables people to experiment. So that's why we had this Cambrian explosion of protocols in Ethereum, for example. But in the end, once you found a protocol that serves its purpose very well, you don't need to have 10 protocols of the same thing. It's like if you, for example, for lending, once we have the best protocol for lending that covers all the possibilities of lending, and it's not that difficult to cover all the possibilities of lending, then you don't need 10 protocols. You will have one lending protocol. And actually, from a security perspective, that's what you want.
Will they become more interoperable?
Absolutely. That's I think the next challenge, and interoperability can be done in multiple levels because you have blockchain to blockchain interoperability. That's what we did with Rootstock, because with Rootstock we created the first bridge, fully operational bridge between two blockchains, It has been running for 4 years with zero downtime, zero hacks. It holds almost 4,000 Bitcoins in value. So, it can be done. It's tough. It's very difficult, but it can be done. And we haven't reached a level of interoperability where the trust minimization is at the maximum, but mostly because the protocols still don't talk to each other very well. It's like when you do interoperability on chain, on the blockchain level, you need one blockchain to understand the transaction on the other blockchain. And then, for example, in the case of Rootstock understands transactions on the Bitcoin side. That's how new Bitcoins are minted. Every time somebody logs a Bitcoin on the Rootstock address on Bitcoin, a new Bitcoin is minted on Rootstock. But when you go back, Bitcoin still doesn't understand a transaction on Rootstock. But that will come. It's like Bitcoin is tougher to change, but I think eventually we'll have that interoperability level. When that happens, what we will have is actually TCP/IP. Like we will have that interoperability between networks.
I wanted to sort of bring it back to, let's call it Earth. In talking about everything that you're talking about, or what's inspired you and the whole journey that you've been on, back to the home territory, back to Argentina. What are the things specifically? Argentina today, there's very high inflation rates. Has it tracked all of the economies in the region?
And we have capital controls again.
Capital controls. It's a large economy, largely, I think, commodity exports, etc. Did sort of where you sit in that ecosystem or that jurisdiction, has that driven certain things about the way that you work or see things or specific opportunities for that particular market?
I think, Argentina is a very particular country because as we had all the economic crisis you can imagine, and we had all the bad government decisions on the economic side, people is hedged against government decision at all times. It's not like in other economies, like people might hedge when there's a crisis. In Argentina, people is hedged by default. It's like, indeed, it's like, everybody saves value. The ones who can save value, store value in dollars, and people operate in pesos, but actually nobody stores value in pesos. So you have a society that by default is always, trying to anticipate. And that's very tough because most of the traditional, economic, doctrine is about making decisions in a way that is swift enough so population cannot adapt to it. But in Argentina, it's almost impossible. That's why who suffers the most in Argentina is the people who with less resources, because they are the ones who cannot store value and anticipate or adapt to. But everybody else is already hedged. Everybody else. So that creates a mindset that is very, friendly for these technologies but they see it as one more hedge because everybody is hedging on the US dollar. Indeed, I would say the more successful use case of crypto in Argentina now is using Tether. It's like even they call it cuevas, like the black market exchanges, brokers. They are using Tether instead of physical dollars, the traditional physical dollars
it's
or
still
wires.
A big cash economy as well, right? There's
a big cash economy for the same reason, because nobody trusts. It's like, you have other things. You have a lot of recessive taxes. So you have, for example, a tax to banking transfers. So every time the bank transfer, you have to pay a tax. Like crazy things like that could be unimaginable anywhere else. We have 100 and something taxes. I don't know. so it's like the whole thing is a mess. So I think because crises are the enablers of change. No, crises are what enables. That was a little bit, in 2013. I also started helping create the Bitcoin communities in Latin America with two partners, with Franco Mati and Rodolfo Andrañez. And that was another big driver for me. I saw in Latin America, and I think that applies to all emerging markets, the opportunity to leapfrog the region into new financial infrastructure that was based on decentralized networks. No, and And I think because of this, because it's constant turmoil, and that erodes the wealth of people. No, it's like being an entrepreneur in Argentina is crazy. It's like I always say, if you are an entrepreneur in Argentina, then you can. It's like doing jungle training for a for a soldier. It's like that's jungle training for an entrepreneur. They drop you anywhere else, and you'll be fine.
I mean, but it does sound. I mean, you've got like I say, high volumes of cash or lots of cash related transactions. Some instability or concern. It seems like, I mean, a very natural fit. How do you think that BTC as a unit of value takes that opportunity, or is already happening? Do people use it more as a reference point that isn't subject to the control of anyone or anything?
BTC is a store of value, but for the longer term. It's like so those who are storing value for maybe 2-3 years, and that was also part of why I realized we need to have what now has the name of stable coins or stable assets. Because the people who can store value for 2-3 years or more is maybe 20% of the population. But if we want to serve everybody, we need to have, also stable assets that in the short term, they will depreciate. They will be more stable. No, it's like, they will lose purchasing power, because that's always the tension. It's like stability versus purchasing power. No, stable assets are addressing the need to have low volatility in the short term or stability in the short term, although in the midterm and long term, they will lose a lot of purchasing power. Bitcoin is designed to, as a scarce asset, is designed to preserve purchasing power. So it serves different needs. It's like mid to long-term needs or short-term needs, and that's the thing. It's like, but 80% of the population is actually living in the short-term horizon. No, so. And in a way, with Rootstock, what we are trying to do, Rootstock and everything we do at IOE Labs, what we are trying to do is connect both worlds. It's like we think they are not at odds. It's like all the value that is being preserved in Bitcoin for the mid to long term can be used as collateral and as the foundations to create a financial system that can serve any human being. And that's the beauty of it, because blockchains are, if you want, public infrastructure. So what you are doing by that is like, using the value of the wealthier part of the population to support infrastructure that can serve any human being. So it's a way of subsidizing the public infrastructure that the whole society will need, and using the liquidity of the wealthier part also to enable the economic growth and development of the.
And then, but if you listen to that word, I mean, economic growth, would you say, or how would you react to the question of, I don't know, the biggest challenge is, going back to your example at the beginning of the slums of Argentina, etc. Access for those people to that technology is the access point the challenge, or the biggest challenge? I mean, some of it's quite technical. I mean, integration with certain things is reasonably technical. It's not there for a massive open market, really.
Absolutely, and that was part of the original thesis back in 2014 was that by 2020, which already happened, half of the population of the world unbanked population would have a smartphone in their hands. So we were counting on the smartphone penetration reaching critical mass. That already happened. I think we are beyond.
Yeah.
If you go to the slums, everybody has a smartphone. It's like everybody, I would say under 40 has a smartphone for sure. And that's the main challenge I think remains for the next decade, is like how we translate and package these solutions into tools that anybody can use. And that's what at IOE Labs we call the everyday DeFi concept. It's like, because it's not only, it's like removing financial complexity, also like it's tailoring these protocols to the risk that regular people can use and to the complexity that regular people, regular in the sense of non-highly technical and non-highly financial. It's like, they might be amazing in other dimensions, but they are not, advanced in those areas. So I think that's the main challenge of our industry. It's like, and also moving from pure speculation into, because to be honest, it's like until now, speculation was driving the growth, and now we need utility to drive the growth. It's like why the Internet of Information became so successful because suddenly everybody could open a Hotmail account and communicate with their family and friends freely. No, that was so its utility will drive, the good for society and the mass adoption. So we need to create those tools, those applications that really help anybody thrive and have a better life, and then crypto will reach mass adoption.
I think that, listening to you speak, the need or demand for whatever you want to call it, peer-to-peer digital economy in certain parts of the world, in Latin America, whatever. It makes so much sense. There are people driving this the right way, and I would definitely put you in that bucket of people. There are lots of people driving this the wrong way. So how do people sort of make a distinction between someone who makes up a story of being some, DeFi-related lending platform or new elite sort of protocol system, or do some crazy fundraising exercise? There's lots of bad stuff that's happened in the market as well. How do you distinguish between one and the other? Is it the people? It comes back to this question of trust, but is it trust in the people? For an average guy is not going to perform a security audit on a protocol.
No, it's tough. I think it's like, unfortunately, it's through turmoil and crisis that you get the market clean of bad actors. There's no easy answer to that. Also, people talk a lot about greed. No, that people, okay, why you take 20% per year yield when you know that's not that doesn't exist anywhere else. No, like what happened with the Terra Luna case. No, it's like, why people was jumping into. Well, because you have to understand, people have tough lives many times, and they are trying to get a way out. So it's not just plain greed. It's like many times everybody wants to have a better life. So it's but there are no shortcuts in that sense. It's like, value creation has its rules, and I think that's what we are doing. Is that we are creating tools that will preserve the value that people create, the wealth that people create, that's why neutrality and transparency and this open sourceness, like all those elements are ways, or decentralization are tools to protect that. Is to avoid, a government from having the opportunity to seize all your assets, your life work. That happened in Argentina in 2001. It's like we have the first bail-ins. I'm not sure if in the world, but I think very, and everybody got all their assets in the banks. Seized and locked for a year or over a year. And when they had access to their assets again, they were worth 1/4 of their value. And some people had like their life savings there. It was not like, some elderly people had their life savings. So some of them, ended up very bad. So that's going back to the trust thing we were discussing. That is a thing that would never happen if we had, the Internet of Value in place, Bitcoin and robust, resilient protocols in place. That cannot be done again. And that is, I think it's a motivation for many of the original founders of Rootstock. Is like
and the founders of Xapo. If you think about that exact scenario, a private bank with a USD denominated interest-bearing account, which is secured in a foreign jurisdiction with access to BTC in a secure, yielding way. Not to go on a sales pitch, but that's becomes super relevant, right?
But that's everyday DeFi. It's like DeFi is all these decentralized financial products, like put it, in terms that anybody can use on their daily life, that are shaped in a way that is safe for people. And I think that's exactly where we need to go. It's like, again, utility, and I think third parties will have a role in this. It's not, again, I think the trust accumulated in third parties will be used. It's part of indeed, for me, the more important emerging pattern of this new innovation cycle is reputation-based identity. It's the ability to gather all the reputational traces of an individual and give them control of that. It's like the same. If you think on all the sharing economies, they are walled gardens of reputation, because it's like what Airbnb, Uber, eBay, Amazon do is like they gather reputational information, but they keep it in a walled garden and they create their huge business around this, and they don't give this information back to the true owner of that information, that is the individual interacting. And with these technologies, we have the ability to give back all that information and reputational traces to the people who actually build the interactions and build the network effects. So I think that will be also a big driver, for change.
So do you think that it's fair? I mean, lots of large institutions are doing loads of interesting things, and they have done for the whole of history. Do you think, put the bracket of sort of, I'm going to call it fintech, super generally, or technology, is that the voice piece of that small voice? Is that the way, or the only way, to give access to those kinds of facilities?
It's the beginning, no? I think, money is the blood of our society. So it's like, if we create fairness in the financial world, and fairness through competition, through, like you mentioned, fintechs, is like, for me, even fintechs have not been able to compete fairly with the traditional, with incumbents in the financial system, because they were operating on rails that were controlled by the same people they wanted to disrupt. No, it's like, so that's why many of the more innovative fintechs ended up being acquired, and I would say at a low cost by the incumbents. And that's what we are changing as well. We are creating neutral rails for finance, that where fintechs really have an opportunity to challenge the status quo. So if you ask me, what we are building is also the long tail of fintech. It's creating an environment where fintechs can really challenge and innovate and the status quo, and that will create prosperity for society. Because again, it's like we are, competition is a very great tool.
I think you're absolutely right, and I think you're absolutely right. But how far away do you think we are from being able to actually access everything that we're talking about? Conceptually, a lot of stuff has happened. There's been loads of developments over the last 10 years.
I think we are 2 to 3 years before we can package all these. As an industry, we are in the process of packaging these to a point where I think we will see a moment very soon where you will be able to go from idea to product, like the production-ready fintech solution in a quarter.
And what about on the side of the user, the average guy? Is that a question of education, of learning? I mean, how do people know that this exists? How did you explain to them back in that time what the hell this was? I mean, that's...
At the end, I think, is utility what drives adoption. It's like it was Hotmail. It was not we could explain the web for ages and not get meaningful results. Once you have a utility, that's it. So it's like, when we get to a point where people can download a wallet and suddenly have access to all the financial services they need in a sovereign way, where they know they are protected, in a global way where they know they can interact with anybody in the world instantly, like we do with video conferencing today, which was unthinkable 25 years ago. So once we have the same experience we have for communications, access to information, for finance, that's it. There's nothing to explain. It's like, that's what we need. It's like to provide tools where people can, have a better life by using those tools in a simple to use way. So,
and let me to changing people's lives again, just because it's an interesting point, but where the application use of the technology, so beyond BTC onto RSK, whatever it might be, you've just mentioned self-identity systems. Could be one, land registry, I've heard you talk about before. Loads and loads and loads of theoretical. Where is the application of the technology that will make the biggest difference? Or is it simpler than that? Is it going to be simple access to, units of value?
I think it depends on where you are. No, I think that's why I think emerging markets are so important, because that's where the technology can. If you think in the first world, that the value that these technologies can bring is incremental. It's like, because the banking system, you can argue it pretty much works and pretty much everybody has access to it, or most people has access to it. But when you go to emerging markets, the financial system doesn't work. Half of the population at least is unbanked or underbanked. So that's where the first place where these technologies can provide exponential value. They can change lives in a meaningful way. Nonetheless, I think in the future we will be looking to other things that are very important that we are giving for granted, like privacy. And it's like we are in a society. I think we have given away our privacy, and privacy should be like an essential right for any human being. Because people say, well, if you don't have anything to hide, why you want privacy? No, it's like, and it's not how it works, because you're assuming that the tools we are creating today may be in the hands of well-intended governments and remain in the hands of good people. But what happens if those same tools that today are in the hands of good people fall into dictatorship in the future? Pitifully, we only understand.
You're right. I think it's the biggest gap as well. If all the things we've talked about, you mentioned video conferencing, we've talked about the evolution of the internet generally. I mean, music-based systems, all sorts of industries have evolved with use of different technologies. And payment systems are it's one of the most legacy infrastructures that still
100%.
exists. And probably one of the biggest gaps that exists. And for me, personally, I think the interplay between that financial system and the new developing system is pretty fundamental. And that's why as Xapo, that's pretty interesting where we sit. So
yes, because you also need to preserve the rules of society or the controls that society has to. Compliance, you have a lot of the compliance, although you can argue that some of the compliance has been weaponized and is used as a tool to control or to do geopolitical games. But regardless of that, compliance has a true merit in being a tool to protect society. So you want to. I think crypto is the only is the only tool that has the right balance between being privacy protecting and being able to be compliant and to protect the rules of society as we know it. So in a way, that's very important. That's why crypto is so important for society in general. It's the only way where you can have both.
I love the story that you told once. I've heard you tell it about one character right at the beginning of your time, and you'll know his name better than I do. I'd love to hear that story. In all of this journey, now you can talk so technically about so many different things, how much of an impact that initial story had on you and the process or thought process that you've been through.
Hannibal was the leader in a community we were doing social work, and he was a mason. He was, for example, creating different building techniques to accelerate and improve. He was amazing. He was creating this modular building system by himself. He had not even primary education, but he was building all these modular things so people could bring up their houses in a better way, more sturdy, more resilient. Because in the slums, many times they have these tin walls, and so he was doing all those things. He was helping at the same time he was working, of course, to support his family. He was the reason why, because he was not the only person I saw being treated unfair by society in a way, or not. But he was the epitome of that. It's he was because he had all the qualities I admire in a human being. It's hard workness, perseverance, kindness. He really was a human being. I think all of us would love to be in sense of how kind he was with his surroundings, how generous he was, and the fact that he could never thrive. It's something that in a way shaped why I do what I do. I think the level of solidarity I saw in those areas where people have almost nothing. It's they barely have homes. They live day by day. It's but they share everything they have. So you when you see that level of solidarity and kindness, and it's and even gratitude. No, it's the happiness they had. I was going for many years until I was 15. I was going every weekend, and doing meditation with them, which you might think, okay, why meditation in an environment where the material needs are so big, but for them was very good because it was a moment to be able to have peace in an environment that is also very violent. It's like I've been in crossfire because it's like sometimes they were shooting from one block to the other in the slums, and I've been right around like witnessing things like that. So so it was an amazing, like, for me it was a forming experience. It's like that there are things that in human nature that transcend the economical aspects. So it's like those are the values we want to preserve, no? And we want to give the tools for any human being that has the right values, the opportunity to thrive and develop. No?
It's amazing that 30 years later you still remember that story and that he had that impact on you from the way that he approached things in that way. That's awesome. We've got to close things out. And I've heard you say before that you think that, I don't know, the social fabric of Argentina or Latin America is going to change, or it will be different in 2030. Do you think that's already happening, or what do we need to do to help get there, or what are the pieces that you're playing in making that happen?
I think it's like, because you are mentioning something that for me is it's deep into my heart. It's like every time you travel through Latin America, you see, there's a lot of Hannibals everywhere. It's like you can see the kindness, the generosity, the loving nature of people in Latin America. So when you walk through Latin America, it's like you have been there. So you know it's like so amazing. It's like I'm astonished every time I go to a new country in Latin America. And they only need the tools to prosper, no? And I think those tools are not coming from the top down. It's like I think how we can change the fabric is like by basically enabling these tools to reach people. And I think that will be a work with governments, but more with local governments than with national governments. I think the change is not going to come from the top down. I think the nation state in a way is failing people. But the city-states, the local governments, they are in touch with people, and then they still are very aware and willing to help people. So I think we can do a lot of things, creating a fabric on the lower level, close to regional development, economic development, to the city level. And I think that's how I think we can reshape Latin America to truly create the bridges between the local economies, to create like an integrated region. And
it needs thought leaders, it needs mavericks like you driving those conversations. I think you're doing an amazing thing, and I'm super happy to be a very small part of that. Amazing to hear.
Thank you so much. And you're right, we can all do our contribution to this change. Thank you for having me.
Thanks for watching Mavericks, brought to you by Xapo Bank. Please like and subscribe for more episodes.